comes to hot hatches, it's fair to say that the folks at Renault really do have some absolute stunners on their resume. The phrase and name Renault Sport really does mean something and has quite the reputation behind it, and for good reason. The car to my right is one such car, but it's one you might not have heard of before. Hello and welcome to the Renault Sport Mégane 225 Trophy. Yes, today I've got the rather unconventional key to this. It's a 2005 Renault Sport Mégane 225 Trophy. An interesting thing, a rare thing, and one, as I said, you've probably not heard of before. We're going to have a look around it inside now, under the bonnet, and then we're going to take it out for a little blast on the road and see if this Renault Sport is worthy of the name. So let's crack on. It's funny really, because in the modern era, the words Renault and motorsport go together about as well as vegan and abattoir. It really doesn't make all that much sense if you're only familiar with the modern Renault brand. However, in the mid to early 2000s, that really wasn't the case. In that era, Renault was on cloud nine. Their F1 team was unparalleled. Fernando Alonso was absolutely tearing up the track, and everyone wanted a bit of that Renault Sport action. Now, it's no surprise that with all this motorsport success that the folks at Renault Sport, the engineers and the boffins, were making some thoroughly good models to get buyers in the door so they could buy into that motorsport experience. There was the Renault Sport Clio, the Renault Sport Spider. There were some absolute gems of a model. What they needed was a bigger hatchback to compete in that sort of market, your Focus STs, your Golf GTIs. And so, for the first time ever, they took their second generation X84 Renault Mégane and painted the Meganne with a Renault Sport paintbrush. The second gen X84 Meganne was the ideal car to do this with, really, because it was already quite a radical model in its standard form. There was this really quite interesting rear end. It was styled quite impressively. It was a little bit bonkers. It had some of that French weirdness inside and out. And so to turn everything up to 11 and make a motorsport derived version just made sense. The 225 Trophy had some quite impressive styling upgrades. Front and rear, you had these aggressive bulbous bumpers, you had unique 18-inch anthracite wheels, and they were all finished in this rather fetching Nimbus grey. It was the driveline and underpinnings that made this car what it was, really. For the corners, you had stiffer suspension and a limited slip differential, and nestled under the bonnet here, you had a 2-litre turbo 4-cylinder engine, good for, surprisingly, 225 brake horsepower. 0 to 60 was around 6.5 seconds with a top speed of 147 miles an hour. Perfectly adequate to keep you up with the Golf GTIs and Focus STs of the era. Well, it certainly looks the part from an aesthetic standpoint, and on paper at least, it performs exceptionally well. It's got some very good stats to back it up. So why has everyone forgotten about this car? Why does no one talk about it? Well, I think it comes down to a couple of things. The main one being, it's not quite bonkers enough to be a Renault Sport Renault. If you think of what else was out at the time, you had the Clio V6 with a rear engine 3-litre V6 and giant flared arches. You had the Renault Sport Spider, and from the very same generation of Megane, you had the R26. They were all slightly more bonkers, that little bit more memorable, and they did everything that this did well, a little bit better. Pair this with the fact that only 500 of these were made for the global market, and only around 150 of them were in right-hand drive form for the UK market. There just weren't that many on the roads. People weren't seeing these and people weren't talking about them. They were used as a bit of a press tool at the Monaco Grand Prix with Fernando Alonso, which certainly did some good things. But think about it now. When's the last time you saw one of these or really even thought about them? Probably very long time ago, if at all. Inside is likely exactly what you'd expect for a car like this. I've got some very nice Renault Sport seats up in front with embossed Renault Sport logos. I've got some very exotic blue seat belts so that you know we're in a fancy version of a Megane, and not much else. The only real way you can differentiate this from a normal Megane, so to speak, is the Megane trophy plaque down here, which indicates that this is car number 446. It's quite a late one. There is an unavoidable cheap feel in here. There's no getting around that. I've got textured plastics just about everywhere I can touch, and where there isn't textured plastic, there is some rather interesting faux carbon fibre fascias in this particular example. But that doesn't bother me all that much. You're pretty much going to get something like this in every French hatchback of the era. I'm not expecting BMW Rolls-Royce luxury in here. I'm here for the driveline, the underpinnings, the suspension. As long as the cabin is pleasant enough, which this particular example is, there's room for 5, I really can't complain all too much. I've got my classically unconventional Renault key. I'm going to pop it in the slot and let's take it out on the road and see what it's like to drive. Well, we're up to temperature, so let's take it out for a proper drive. It's an interesting car, this Renault. I hear such high praise for this generation of Megane, the R26, any of them. They're all very highly regarded, but from where I'm sitting, it does feel a little bit numb. I was expecting big things from this, being a trophy, limited run, 1 of 500, 225 brake horsepower. On paper, that all sounds very good, but on the road, I don't think it translates into that exciting of a drive. The fit and finish is classically French early 2000s, poor quality, it's very plasticky, it's a bit creaky, it doesn't seem or feel like that nice of a place to be, but most of the French hot hatches of this era are like that, and that can be forgiven normally when you get out on the road and push it through the bends on the twisty stuff. But in this, I'm a little bit underwhelmed, to say the least. There's a decent level of power, 225 brake horsepower, you should expect nothing less, but it doesn't feel a quick car, that's for sure. If I put my foot down, there's no fanfare, there's no engine noise, it's incredibly quiet, and some people might like that, but I think if you're buying a Megane RenaultSport Trophy, you want a little bit of excitement, you want a little bit of fizz and buzz, and from where I am, I'm just not getting that yet. All this being said, when you do get into a corner, you can arguably still have some fun. I'm going through the twisties now, and there's a little bit of a smile creeping through on my face. The French do corners very, very nicely. It feels planted, it feels tight, it feels concise. I've got a 6-speed manual gearbox to hand. It's perfectly good enough, though I would note the throws are quite long, and the whole shifter just feels like quite a long assembly, a little bit loose. Really, a short throw kit would work wonders in here. I think that would do a lot for the dynamic feel of this car. I think a lot of my problem lies with the fact that I know this car could be better. I've driven an R26 Megane, and I get that it's a different animal, but there's something more endearing about that car than there is with this one. This just feels like the R26's slightly more bland, boring brother. It's funny, the power band is really quite high up in the rev range, and it sort of only seems to come alive once you get up into third gear. In those early gears, first and second, when you're doing slower speeds, there's not a great deal of anything, but knock it into third and you can have a bit more fun. So then, the RenaultSport Megane 225 Trophy. What have I got to say? What are my thoughts? Well, it's an interesting one really, because I wanted to love this car and I spent a great deal of time with it over the last day or so, and I've just not quite got there yet. I was really hoping this would live up to my expectations and of my experience of other early 2000s, late 90s fast bonkers Renaults, but it just hasn't quite got there yet, and it's an awful shame because on paper, everything about this car just works. Aesthetically, I absolutely love it. There's no getting around that. I know a lot of people hate that rear end and don't like this generation of Megane, but I'm firmly in the love category. I think it looks the part, especially with the big wheels in the silver. It's just a smart looking car. It's got a nice level of aggression, and I think it's aged very well. Inside, yes, it's a little bit cheap, but what are you expecting with an early 2000s performance Renault? It's just on the road, it doesn't translate into all that much fanfare. It handles incredibly well for a front wheel drive car, there's no getting around that, but it didn't feel awfully fast, engaging, or just particularly fun. I might as well have been in a regular Megane, to be honest. It just didn't excite me, and that's a crying shame. I think from a collector and enthusiast point of view, this is a car that's bound to go up over the next few years, though. They're awfully rare in the UK. I can't remember the last time I saw one. So if you do want one, grab one as soon as you see it, because it's probably going to be a long time before the next one comes up to market. And at their current price point, they are relatively good value. If you look at what the Clio V6s are doing now, £40,000-£50,000, what's this going to do then? Thank you very much for watching the video review of this rare piece of Renault Sport history. I do hope you've enjoyed.